Part of this video is sponsored by Aimii. Enter an Eastern European supermarket anywhere in the world. Between the pickles and the tvarog, between suspicious sausages and buckets of mayo, there it is. An absolute staple, Korean carrots, also known as Morkovcha. I absolutely love this simple yet delicious dish, but its origins have always been a mystery to me. I mean, you find this supposedly Korean dish everywhere in the post-Soviet world. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, every deli counter, every salad bar, every grandma fridge. There is just one place in the world you definitely won't find it, and that is Korea. First of all, let me say this, Korean carrots taste absolutely amazing. Cold, crunchy, garlicky, tangy, some chili heat. But let's address the elephant in the room, like, why Korean? What does Korea have to do with a carrot salad you buy next to herring and kefir in a Slavic supermarket? Well, the short answer, Morkovcha is Korean, just not in the way you think. The missing link here is not really a story about recipes. It's a story about famine, empire, deportation, and culinary stubbornness. Let's uncover the history of Korean carrots, or Morkovcha, a dish that really is just a poster child of an entire culinary tradition, Soviet Korean food. I know you have questions, so grab a cup of Korean or Russian tea, your choice, because we're traveling back to the moment when history and carrots collide, and the story of Morkovcha begins. It's the late 19th century. Korea is in chaos. There is famine, there is poverty, and in 1910, Japan officially annexes the entire peninsula, adding political violence and chaos to the mix. Life becomes unbearable for many people, and some start looking north, across a shallow river called the Tuman River, or Tumangang, into the Russian Far East. It has tons of available land, relative opportunity, and initially at least a set of quite welcoming policies that made settlement over the border a lucrative option for Koreans, especially for those living under colonial repression and starvation. And won't you look at that, by the 1920s and 30s, well over 150,000 Koreans settled there, around Vladivostok, mostly in a region called Primorsky Krai. They call themselves Koryo Saram, which in Korean means Korean people. And they don't just survive there, they actually thrive. First come successful farms, but quite soon the community takes root. They build schools, theaters, establish Korean newspapers, and even get their own semi-autonomous government districts. Don't forget, their settlement began under Imperial Russia, but a few decades later, they are Soviet citizens all of a sudden. And honestly, by most measures, initially, they are actually doing great in the newly founded Soviet Union. But you know, this is when history does what it does best and ruins everything. Look, up until around 1930, Soviet state control in the Far East is relatively loose. The state is in its early years and has other priorities closer to St. Petersburg and Moscow, the epicenters of the revolution. But with this guy called Joseph Stalin, you may have heard of him, things started to change very quickly. He famously is a really paranoid person, always suspecting a plot against him. And in 1937, Stalin is in an extra paranoid mood. He looks at the Soviet-Korean border, which, remember, at that time, Korea was actually a full-on colony of Imperial Japan, a mortal enemy of the Soviet Union. And Stalin sees something he really doesn't like: thousands and thousands of Koreans on Soviet territory. So with absolutely no evidence, he decides they must be Japanese spies, an entire network of collaborators just waiting to infiltrate and crush the Soviet Union. So he signs an order. Resolution 1428-326 CC. Translation: deport every single Korean. Men, women, children, babies, grandmas, all of them. This is the first time in Soviet history an entire ethnic group is deported at once. Sadly, not the last time either, but that's for another time. Almost overnight, secret police agents start knocking on Koreans' doors. You have 30 minutes to pack. People are loaded onto cargo trains. And no, not passenger trains, cattle cars. No toilets, no heating, tiny windows. But Stalin isn't even deporting them to Korea. Their destination, the deserts of Central Asia. 6,400 kilometers away. And this is where the history of the Koryo Saram really takes not just one, but many turns. Which of course I'll tell you all about after a word from this video's sponsor, Aimii. You know I love traveling the world for food, but what's the most important thing for any traveler in the 21st century? That's right, staying connected. And that's where Saily comes in. Saily is an eSIM app, basically a digital SIM that gives you mobile data without swapping any physical SIM card. If you've ever landed somewhere and instantly needed Google Maps, a taxi app to message friends, Saily is the fix. They offer plans in over 200 destinations, plus regional or global options if you're hopping between countries. And here's how it works. You just download the Saily app, pick your destination, then you choose a data plan and install the eSIM. That's simple. Install it once and you're set. Actually, little pro tip from me, do it before you travel so when you land, you're instantly connected. No roaming shock, no Wi-Fi hunting. And of course, no waiting in line or getting ripped off by sketchy airport SIM sellers. If you have any issues, Saily has 24/7 chat support. So, planning an adventure? Perfect. Right now you can get 15% off. Just download Saily and use code Andong at checkout. Scan the QR code on screen or check the link in the video description. Thank you Saily for sponsoring this video. The journey of the koryo from the Russian Far East is nothing short of torture. It takes up to 40 days and people don't even really know where they're being taken to. Many die on the way, from the cold, from starvation, from terrible health conditions. Their bodies are dumped at stations along the way and sometimes even from moving trains because there's simply nowhere to bury them. Children, the elderly, the sick, no one is spared. Around 170,000 people were initially deported and historians estimate that between up to a third of them didn't make it. And because in Korean culture, unburied dead are thought to wander the earth rather than find peace, these trains become known by the eerie name ghost trains. But eventually, weak and starving, they arrive. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, an arid steppe of dry deserts. No houses, no villages, no infrastructure, just land as far as the eye can see. It's already late autumn, and with winter coming, people have no choice but to dig holes in the ground, like literally earth houses to survive the cold. The more lucky ones are crammed into abandoned buildings, old warehouses, hospitals, prisons. No one had prepared for their arrival. To the state, they were just a problem that had been moved elsewhere. But the torment isn't even over yet. With disease and starvation plaguing the people, up to another quarter of the population dies in the first years. The only reason many survive is because local Kazakh and Uzbek families, who themselves have very little, share food and shelter. And this is where carrots finally enter the story and we turn to a slightly happier chapter. One of the few things the koryo were allowed to bring with them were seeds from home, like plant seeds, an important memento of their past lives. Carefully wrapped, they brought chili, beans, corn, Korean chives, everyday vegetables from back home. But there's a big problem. The climate is all wrong. Back in the Russian Far East, they could grow cabbage, daikon, just like they could back home in Korea. All those things they needed for kimchi, their absolute staple food. In Central Asia though, it's dry, hot, arid. Cabbage doesn't do well, radish struggles, but Carrots grow just fine. And so they adapt. They take a Korean cooking technique for seasoning shredded radish called muche and apply it to carrots. They obviously leave out some important ingredients like the seafood, but instead they go heavy on garlic, oil, vinegar, maybe some chili, whatever was available. And guys, not because they wanted to be creative, but because after being ripped from their roots, they wanted something that tasted like home. And that new technique, it actually gains some traction. People add cumin or coriander, some add sesame seeds, and slowly a new dish is born. Not fully Korean, not fully Central Asian, and not really Soviet either. More like a carrot salad with Korean logic. And within a few years, something miraculous happens. The salad, it spreads from Korean communities to their Uzbek neighbors, to markets, canteens, to factory kitchens, and eventually millions of refrigerators across the USSR. By the 1970s, Morkovcha is everywhere, except in Korea, of course. But here's the wild part. Those same people who were dumped in the desert, they proved to be more than just a resilient bunch that survived. They actually became Soviet legends. First came agriculture. These guys brought a lot of technique and knowledge with them. Without ever being asked to, they start building these highly advanced irrigation systems, turning dry land into actually productive rice fields. And in spite of their horrible conditions, they somehow managed to run the most productive collective farms in the entire Soviet Union. Especially after the death of Stalin, when things become a bit easier politically in the country, the state eventually notices, and dozens of koryo-saram received the highest civilian award, the Hero of Socialist Labor. It's a medal. Their kids, somewhat boosted by their reputation betterment, get to go to university in huge numbers actually, in fact double the Soviet average. And it's these kids, and of course their kids after them, that eventually become doctors, scientists, engineers, generals, musicians. One of them, for example, is Viktor Tsoi, frontman of the band Kino, which is basically the Beatles of late Soviet rock in the 1980s. Another is Tatiana Kim, founder of Wildberries, which is the biggest online store in Russia, and she is one of the richest women in the country today. That's just to name a few super famous examples, all from a community that once lived in holes in the ground. And their food, it quietly spread with them. There's Korean-style pickled cabbage, there are garlicky pickled vegetable salads, and there is a famous cold noodle salad in post-Soviet countries called funchosa. That is also from those koryo-saram roots. But of course, no dish reigns more supreme than the one that started it all, Korean carrots. So the next time you see Morkovcha in a Slavic supermarket, don't think, oh, some weird fake Korean salad. Think this is a historic recipe, a deportation recipe. This is what kimchi becomes when you make making kimchi impossible. It's basically history shredded and seasoned. And now I bet you really want to try some Morkovcha, don't you? Well, you're in luck. I went down a little recipe testing rabbit hole, and I am very proud of my own new Morkovcha recipe, which is linked below. Because this dish, born from tragedy, deserves to be delicious. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.